Welcome to Case Files, the human factor. We are going to unpack and explore human behavior. And human behavior is fascinating. We're going to look at trauma, victimology, and I'm going to use all of my expertise over the last 25 years to really give you the gift of understanding human behavior and the fascination we've got with psychopathology, crime, victimology, criminal justice, mental health, forensics and statutory cases. And with that, I will, on my own and with the assistance of some of my guest speakers, really give you insight in what the human factor means in our lives and our daily existence. Welcome to the human factor. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at the psychopath versus the sociopath. Now, interestingly enough, many people come in and ask me, or they say, but I'm dating a psychopath, or this person is definitely a sociopath, and they use the terms interchangeable. And then there's now sort of been a thrown in of, no, but they've got an antisocial personality disorder, and they use all of those terms together. So what is important to understand is what is the different terminologies and what does it mean? That we don't get confused and that we really fully understand, but what is the psychopathic traits? What is sociopathic traits? What does it mean to say sort of an antisocial personality disorder? So this podcast is going to be a bit more like a lecture style type. And as what you know, I love the academia. I've done a lot of research. I've done a lot of publications. So forgive me if it becomes a little bit tedious, but I do think it's important that we don't just talk. I'll talk through it, but I also want to just go to textbook knowledge, that there is really a good understanding, and I'll try and make it as practical as possible, of, but who is the psychopath? Who's the sociopath? And what does it mean, the antisocial personality disorder? So I want you to understand that the terms psychopath and sociopath are often used interchangeable to describe individuals with antisocial personality disorder, so ASPD. So they represent distinct behavioral and personality traits, and both fall under that umbrella of the antisocial personality disorder. And we've got a diagnostic and statistical manual of mental health disorders. That's where all of these diagnostics are written up, and mental health practitioners use this manual to try and understand and to sort of, for the psychologists, the clinical psychologists, and for the psychiatrists to make certain diagnoses, and for other mental health practitioners to use this diagnostic book to really understand the symptomatic presentations and the presentations of the person with specific mental health disorders. Now, for the layperson and perhaps the person that is just listening to this podcast, very important to not just use these terms loosely. And I've heard that, and it takes away from real significant mental health problems. We can't go around and just say everyone that we've dated are psychopaths, or everyone that we've met in our workplace are now a bunch of sociopaths or have got antisocial personality disorders. It takes away from the seriousness of individuals that are classified as sociopaths, psychopaths. So don't use this term loosely after this podcast and think, oh, I've listened to her, I'm just going to make this tick list. No, my ex-boyfriend is definitely a psychopath. Perhaps he is, but perhaps he's not. So just be careful of using these labels and these diagnoses flippantly within your own life. So let's just look at the origins and the causes of psychopaths and sociopaths. So what is the main difference? And I think that is important to understand. So with the psychopath, so with psychopathy, it is generally believed that there's a genetic component and there's a difference in the brain structure, especially in areas responsible for emotions, impulse control, and empathy. So empathy is, and that's most people would say, but oh, he's got no empathy, or she's got no empathy. She just feels something, or she feels nothing. Now, empathy is a big part of looking at psychopathy, and we have to look at sort of that emotional regulation and the impulse control. So the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex of the brain, that is what we look at when we think about psychopathy and how that emerges. So these neurological differences can affect emotional regulation. So if we look at the amygdala and we look at the prefrontal cortex, so those emotional regulation differences for the person and the processing differences, that's when we look at psychopathy and how that presents. So if we look at the sociopath, now the sociopath is more commonly linked with environmental factors. So with the psychopathy, more with genetic, and we've spoken about the brain function and more of the medics around that. If we look at the sociopath, we're talking about more the environment. So not the internal, inside of us, we're looking at the external, the environment, such as trauma, abuse, negative early life experiences. So all of those triggers and experiences and environmental things that can occur, that can lead to presentations of sociopathies and the sociopathic personality that emerges. So a turbulent upbringing, exposure to violence, formative year disruptions can all contribute to sociopathic tendencies. So it's very important to understand these differences. So when you think about psychopathy, think more brain, internal, sort of an internal chemical response cycle. When you think about sociopaths, think more about environmental things, lifestyle occurrences, and experiences. That is the best way, just in a very simplistic way, to explain the origins and the causes of psychopaths and sociopaths. So if we look at the psychopath, just the emotional detachment there. So they exhibit shallow emotions and a profound lack of empathy, making it difficult for them to form genuine emotional connections. So that is what you see just with the psychopath and the emotionality around sort of that psychopath and how they present. So not a lot of emotional presentations. They can, however, and this is where it becomes complicated, be very charming and manipulative. So psychopaths often appear charismatic and can easily manipulate others for personal gain. So it's all about that personal gain. They can also be very calm and calculated. They rarely display emotional outbursts and are typically cool under pressure, even in stressful situations. And we often see that, for example, in court proceedings, this psychopath that gives testimony, very cool, very calm, very manipulative, charismatic, and come across quite good on the stand. That can be very confusing in a court case, for example. So if we look at the sociopath, so they are capable of emotional attachment. While they struggle with empathy, sociopaths may form bonds with certain individuals, like families or friends, so there's more of a social engagement. Impulsive and unpredictable, so they can become more prone to emotional outbursts or aggressive dysregulation, poor impulse control. So that is different than the experience or the presentation of the psychopath. They're less manipulative and more blunt. So with the sociopath, they may lack the calculated charm of the psychopath. They're not as calculated as the psychopath and are more likely to act inappropriate and erratic in social situations that you wouldn't often find with the psychopath. So there's differences, and you need to be able to understand these differences. Otherwise, you just cluster things together. And as I say, you start using these terms flippantly. That is really not effective in situations where you are working with a very complicated personality. Now, if you are in a relationship with the psychopath or the sociopath, it is a complicated journey that needs to be navigated carefully and needs to be understood, because no one goes into a relationship thinking they are having a romantic relationship or in a partnership, a business partnership with a psychopath or a sociopath. No one would do that because they would understand there's significant negative ramifications. But when you start to realize that and it emerges, very important to understand this is complicated, it can be quite dangerous, and you need to understand how do you deal with these personality types. So with the psychopath, there's presentations of being, if we look at their behavior patterns, of being highly organized. The risk-taking without fear emerges, and there is sometimes criminal behavior. Now, as I say, remember, this is not always, nothing of what I'm discussing is always the case, but there is a profile, and we need to look at sort of what are signs, telling signs. And often with the psychopath, these are the behavioral patterns that are telling signs. So the risk-taking behavior without fear may look like taking a risk but are more calculated, understanding the stakes but not feeling the fear. You often see that with the psychopath. With the highly organized skills that they've got, their behavior is often premeditated, meticulous, and it's planned. So it's action, planned behavior, planned action behavior, both sides. It's interchangeable. There's a plan. If we look at the sociopath, there's more disorganization and impulsiveness. The actions are more spontaneous and reckless, and often leading to frequent legal trouble. There's a highly likelihood of violence. So sociopaths are more prone to violent outbursts and crimes of passion. And there's more of a short-term focus than that of the psychopath. So if we look at the conscious and the morality, because that's obviously where we want to look at is, but do they have a conscious, and what is the morality aspect when we speak about these antisocial personalities? So with the psychopath, there's a lack of conscience. So psychopaths have no real sense of guilt or remorse. So just in a basic relationship structure, let's say at work or home, in sort of a discussion, you would want, but say sorry. You have to say sorry, but why are you not remorseful? You have to feel guilty. You've done this. You will get nothing from the psychopath. There is no projection of remorse or guilt that they have done anything wrong. They may mimic social norms, but they only do it to manipulate. So there is no connection to that remorse or that sense of feeling the guilt that they've done something. There is superficial charm often. So their understanding of morality is intellectual rather than emotional, allowing them to fake empathy or remorse very convincingly. So it may look like they are very convincingly empathetic or that they feel, but they don't. So with the sociopath, there's a weak or inconsistent conscience. So sociopaths may have a limited sense of right and wrong, but can rationalize their harmful behavior. They might feel guilt in some situations, but it's rather, you don't often see that in their actions. Now, to have emotionally intelligent conversation where there's understanding, where there's compassion, where there's real empathy is highly unlikely with the psychopath and the sociopath. And that makes it very complicated, because you may feel that way for a very long time in this relationship dynamic. But after a number of years, even, there's telling signs that things just don't match up. And when you start looking at the red flags and not just the green flags that we are prone to look at in a relationship, you can start seeing, but there's a problem here. This is complicated. Why is this person doing this? Why are they not feeling what another person feels with empathy? And you can start seeing there's an emergence of an understanding, but you may be dealing with a psychopath or a sociopath. So if you look at functioning in society, because psychopaths and sociopaths are all around us. So with the psychopath, high functioning, is the high functioning psychopath. So many psychopaths can integrate into society. They often hold good jobs. They maintain composure, seemingly normal relationships, and they are found in power positions as well. But it's complex individuals to deal with. And they can have ruthlessness, and the charm that they have associated to that is very dangerous in the long term in trying to have a relationship with these individuals. With the sociopath, there's a difficulty in functioning. So the sociopaths struggle to maintain steady. So employment may look a little bit rocky. So their relationships, there's a lot of impulsivity around that. It can be a bit more erratic than that of the psychopath. So it is complex individuals to have relationships with. So if we look at just sort of a general summary, and the reality in life is most of us have had dealings with psychopaths or sociopaths in our lives. Some of us knows it, and some of us are just not aware of it, and we just see it as a bad experience, or, oh, that was a complicated relationship. But it is very tricky. So just a quick summary of the key differences. So if we look at the psychopath, so a genetic neurological difference, there's emotionally detached and lack of empathy, calculated, methodical, organized, lacks conscience, manipulates without remorse, often successful, can blend into society, strategic, and less likely to get caught. With the sociopath, we've got environmental factors. That's that trauma, the abuse that I've spoken about. Capable of limited emotional attachments, more impulsive, erratic, and a bit disorganized. A bit of a feeling of a weakness conscience, may feel some guilt, struggles with relationships and stability, and reckless, more like to commit crimes of passion. So those are the differences, the key differences between a psychopath and a sociopath. But while both psychopaths and sociopaths exhibit antisocial behaviors, the key differences lies in the emotional depth, the behavioral tendencies, and the capacity of manipulation. So important to understand that. Now, what I've seen as well is that with the psychopath that raises as a parent, the sociopath develops. That is very interesting in a family dynamic in a system, because you will get the psychopath that covers the child's sociopath behavior. So when people are in a dynamic like that, in a marital relationship or in a workspace, family, businesses, where that dynamic occurs of the psychopath that has raised the sociopath, that is very tricky to navigate in forming relationships or doing business or to manage long-term relationships with these individuals. So very important in real life to understand that there's a lot of personality profiles in people. People come from different places. People's brains work differently. People's life journeys are different. So there's a lot of human factors that we need to consider when working with people, with having relationships with people, with attaching to people. And we need to look at red flags and green flags to make sure that we have safe relationships and that we are engaging with good mental health, with intellectual and emotional intelligence, to make sure that life looks a certain way and we engineer our lives a certain way that can be a healthy and a safe way of living in our work life, in our family life, and in all areas of life, to make sure that we consider different human factors with dealing with different people around us. Because in the world, there's a lot of different peoples that have had a lot of different journeys, a lot of different brains sort of functioning and structures. We need to just look at that carefully when we start seeing that there's problem or that a relationship becomes problematic. Just think about that. But once again, as I say, don't use these terms loosely, because that takes away from real and significant sort of dynamics that emerges because of personality profiles. Thank you for joining the Human Factor, and it's important that we understand and we connect and understand on a layman's level and a professional level what life brings to us and what kind of personalities are out there.